Welcome, fellow voyager through the ages, to this evening's soft drift into the still waters of the past. Whether you're unwinding after a busy day or simply looking for a peaceful pause, I'm thankful you're joining me. Let me know where. In the world you're tuning in from, and what time the stars shine above you. I like to imagine us as flickers of warmth scattered across the globe, united by curiosity and the hush that night brings. If these slow, thoughtful stories offer you a touch of peace, consider subscribing. We have many more quiet echoes of history yet to explore. The North Sea was no gentle neighbor. Each year it claimed ship after ship, its frigid waters and sudden storms turning ordinary voyages into struggles against nature. But those who sailed these dangerous seas were not simply fortunate survivors. They were experts shaped by generations of hard-earned knowledge. These mariners read the clouds like ancient texts, interpreted the flight patterns of seabirds as signs from nature, and could sense incoming danger long before it arrived. Picture a fishing crew leaving a coastal English village in the heart of winter. Their vessel perhaps 30 feet of sturdy oak boards, fastened with iron nails and sealed, with pitch might seem fragile to modern eyes. No radios, no forecasts, no digital maps. Just rope made of hemp, sails of coarse canvas, and a deep, instinctive understanding of the sea's rhythms passed down through families. These sailors possessed a near-infinite understanding of the wind, able to feel the smallest shift in breeze direction and know what it meant. They watched the waves, noting how their pattern or height might whisper of far-off gales or hidden sandbars below. Even the color of the water spoke to them. Pale green hinted at shallow banks that could easily wreck a ship. Deep blue promised open waters, but warned too of the wild heart of the ocean. Among all their challenges, navigation was perhaps the most daunting. With no modern tools to guide them, these seafarers relied on stars, memory, and the contours of distant land. They learned to chart their way by constellations, seasonal winds, and the recognizable shapes of headlands seen only from sea. The most seasoned among them could even gauge their location by tasting seawater, sensing minute differences in salt and warmth that marked one region from another. But if there was one skill above all that marked their survival, it was their attunement to weather. These mariners had a gift what might now be called early meteorology, born not from machines but from attention. They could spot a cloud formation and predict a shift in wind, read the surface of the sea for signs, or watch marine animals behaving strangely and know a storm wasn't far off. When bad weather arrived, they relied on methods passed down from centuries of experience. They tied down every object, adjusted the sails, and prepared to face nature's fury. Their goal was not to overpower the storm, but to ride it, to move with it, not against it. In those moments, it wasn't just physical strength that mattered, but mental resilience. Living for weeks on damp ships, with simple food and endless danger, tested even the toughest souls. But strong crews had traditions to keep spirits up. It told tales, sang as they worked, and followed orders with a calm unity that kept panic at bay. Some sailors became deeply superstitious, crafting intricate rituals they believed would bring good fortune and protect them from misfortune. These beliefs, legendary even in medieval times, formed a rich tapestry of seafaring lore. It was thought to be bad luck to whistle during calm weather, to sail on a Friday, or to bring bananas aboard. Killing an albatross was seen as inviting disaster. Sailors avoided looking back at shore once a voyage had begun, and might touch iron to ward off ill fate. While such traditions might seem irrational now, they served an important psychological purpose. In a world where storms could rise without warning, and sickness or shipwreck lurked always nearby, these rituals gave sailors a sense of control. Even when reason failed, belief offered comfort. The bonds among seafarers extended beyond individual ships, forming a larger brotherhood across the waves. When vessels met at sea, it was customary and often life-saving to exchange help, share provisions, or pass messages along. This spirit of solidarity carried into harbor life too. Sailors from different nations would often join forces, trading knowledge about shifting tides, rough waters, and safe passages. Veterans mentored newcomers, teaching them how to navigate both the technical and social life of the sea. But the most astonishing thing was not merely how these mariners endured hardships, it was how they found joy in the midst of them. Marveled at sunsets blazing across the horizon, at the shimmering trails left by bioluminescence, at the playful arcs of dolphins riding the waves. The ocean's beauty became a source of strength, not just awe. Small triumphs became moments of real celebration, spotting land after weeks of nothing but sea, catching fresh fish to vary their diet, or safely navigating a perilous strait. These moments reminded them they were still alive and still human. It was perhaps this ability to embrace beauty amid adversity that most defined their survival. In doing so, they did more than simply endure the sea. They created a life shaped by meaning and resilience. For example, rippled through centuries, shaping the customs of maritime tradition. Practices like naval discipline, maritime law, shared songs and tales, all find roots in these early communities of seafarers. Their lessons remind us that survival isn't just about knowing how to fix a sail or ration food, though those skills matter. It's also about forging bonds, finding purpose, and sustaining hope. These early mariners knew the sea could take everything but their unity. That unity became their strongest weapon, and so their stories inspire not because they beat the sea with brute strength, but because they faced it together. Their strength didn't lie in isolation, but in shared effort, knowing that when one faltered, another would step in. When the ocean turned violent and the ship shook like a leaf in the wind, that brotherhood became everything. Older sailors would guide younger ones with calm clarity. Their words not just instructions, but anchors in chaos. Stay with me. These weren't just orders, they were promises. Shipboard traditions weren't just quaint habits. Evening prayers weren't just for divine favor. They reminded the crew they were united. Familiar verse spoken together could calm nerves better than any rope. Songs sung during work were not merely chants to pass the time. They built rhythm. Yes, but they also built identity. A man knew he belonged, not just to a crew, but to a legacy of those who had braved the waves for generations before him. In those long night watches weren't spent in silence. They were filled with stories, some true, some imagined, all holding hidden lessons. A tale of surviving a wreck might carry tips for storm navigation. A pirate story might teach what to do when outnumbered. These oral traditions became libraries of survival knowledge passed hand to hand, voice to voice, and the rituals surrounding food, drink, and the dead weren't just about fairness or respect. They kept the ship from falling into despair. Sharing the last biscuit equally wasn't just decent, it was survival. When someone was lost to the sea, the crew honored him with solemn ceremony, not just to mourn, but to affirm that every life had meaning. The living took comfort in knowing their own end would not go unnoticed. The trust forged in storms was unlike any other. It wasn't theoretical, it was literal. A man's life might depend on his crewmate holding the line. Bonds formed under those conditions didn't break. These sailors' knowledge wasn't only technical, it was instinctual. They could feel the weather shift in their bones. They read the ocean in ways that no book could teach. The scent of the wind, the color of the water, silence before a squall, these were their guideposts. Their bravery wasn't loud or flashy. It was steady. It was climbing aloft in driving rain, standing watch while others slept, facing each morning without knowing what it would bring, and above all, they held on to their humanity. In places where it could easily be lost, they chose care, discipline, and respect. Codes of conduct weren't written, they were lived. New sailors were taught not just how to haul lines, but how to be reliable companions. They treated the sea with deep reverence. It's not as something to conquer, but as something powerful, worthy of respect. Their superstitions weren't foolishness. They were humble acknowledgement of forces beyond control. And in that humility, they found strength. Their legacy teaches us that humans can endure almost anything with shared purpose, mutual respect, and quiet courage. They proved that survival is not just about being the strongest or smartest, but about leaning on one another. They showed that dignity, discipline, and compassion can thrive even in the harshest environments. In the end, It wasn't rope work or navigation alone that saved them. It was the knowledge that they didn't face the ocean alone. They faced it together. Anticipating danger and preparing for it was an essential part of survival. Managing food and water was a science in itself. Sailors became adept at identifying early signs of spoilage in salted meat and biscuits. They learned how to stretch, dwindling supplies across long journeys, discovering which kinds of seaweed could be safely eaten, how to catch fish in rough seas, most importantly, how to harvest and store rainwater during storms. The ability to ration water often meant the difference between returning home and vanishing. Without trace, without compasses or charts, navigation demanded a rare sensitivity to the sea. Skilled sailors could read subtle variations in wave color, to judge nearness to land, observe bird flight, to estimate direction, or even detect faint plant scents carried on the wind. They memorized constellations with near-religious focus, using stars to guide them through vast, unknown waters. More impressively still, they came to understand currents and tides in ways that let them harness rather than fight the forces of the sea. By observing the moon and recording tidal behavior, they could anticipate changes long before the science was formalized. This passed-down wisdom would later form the foundation of oceanographic knowledge. Such challenges drew crews together in powerful ways. At sea, birthright lost its meaning. A young sailor who could reef a sail in a squall was more valuable than a nobleman unused to the deck. Bravery, not title, earned respect. This meritocracy fostered a unique culture where trust, skill, and cooperation ruled. It was a society built not on hierarchy, but on shared survival. Mariners also developed creative ways to manage the ever-present threat of shipwreck. They could construct rafts from loose wood, use mirrors or flares to signal passing ships, and stay afloat using inflated skins or barrels. Their ingenuity under pressure often made the difference between rescue and loss. Part 6. The mind forged chains, but even more formidable than wind or wave was the silent battle within. Long voyages carried a different kind of storm one waged inside the human mind. Prolonged isolation, monotony, and the looming unknown pushed many sailors to the brink. Imagine this. A journey expected to last 6 weeks has stretched into 3 months. Drinking water tastes of metal and mold. Salted food is long gone. Each sunrise brings the same bleak ocean, and each night the same creaking timbers, the same men now mumbling to themselves, lost in thought or memory. The human brain wasn't built for this, what we might today call depression. Anxiety or dissociation, they called sea madness, or the blue devils. And every experienced sailor knew its signs. It began with stillness, men staring for hours across the waves, unblinking and distant. They stopped joining in songs, stopped talking, stopped caring. Hygiene and eating habits declined. This early. Silence often preceded something more disturbing. Next came visions. Some claimed to see islands that weren't there, to hear voices calling from the deep. Familiar voices, lost friends. Others imagined entire cities beneath the sea, radiant with spires and music. In the grip of these hallucinations, men might try to leap overboard, convinced that salvation lay not in the ship, but in the water. Wise captains knew how to act. Melancholic sailors were paired up. None stood watch alone. Rotating duties kept minds occupied, and daily routines preserved structure. Games, storytelling, and prayer weren't just diversions. They were vital tools of survival. Routine became armor. Every day had its shape. Morning began with wind checks and quiet prayer. At noon, sailors tracked the sun not just for position, but to reconnect with the sky, to feel the day marked by something larger. Evening brought shared rations, songs, and stories passed from generation to generation. These rituals were more than tradition, they were medicine. Stories transmitted not just entertainment but knowledge. They taught navigation, described weather signs, and preserved cultural roots. They helped crews remember who they were and where they came from. Take St. Elmo's fire and eerie glow that sometimes flickered on masts during storms. Modern science explains it as static discharge. But to sailors, it was the presence of their patron saint, a sign they weren't alone. This belief didn't stem from ignorance, but from emotional intelligence. It gave meaning to chaos, and with meaning came courage. They treated death at sea with the same care. The passing of a crewmate was never ignored, but left unacknowledged. It could poison morale. So funerals were held with ceremony. The deceased was sewn into canvas, weighted, and lowered with solemn respect. The captain spoke not just prayers, but personal reflections. Crewmates shared memories, stories, and sometimes sang the sailor's favorite tune. Then came silence and a toast. These acts honored the departed and held the living together. But the hardest challenge wasn't sudden. It was slow. When wind died for weeks, when food ran low, when maps no longer made sense and no one knew where they were, in these moments, hope frayed, then leadership mattered most. Captain's strength became the ship's strength. The best projected certainty, even in doubt. They gave clear orders, kept routines intact, and guarded morale as their most precious cargo. When bad news came, they managed it carefully, preserving faith even when facts were bleak. The captain's role was part commander, part caregiver. He needed to make hard decisions, but also be trusted with fears and confessions. Some achieved this with sheer presence, others through steady competence. The wisest blended both, firmness with warmth, authority with humanity. Yet the burden on captains could be greater than on any man aboard. They bore not only their own fears, but the weight of every soul under their command. Every choice where to sail, when to wait, carried real consequences. A wrong decision could cost lives. Many leaned on faith, praying in solitude. Others became precise to the point of obsession, finding control in perfect routines. The best captains didn't see their crew as faceless labor, but as people each with history, needs, and dreams. They learned each man's name, where he came from, what he hoped for, not just out of kindness, but necessity. A man who felt seen and valued was less likely to give in to despair. They watched for small signs of breakdown, a crewmate growing too quiet, hoarding food, or endlessly reminiscing. These were red flags. The response might be as simple as a new assignment, or as serious as temporary confinement for safety's sake. Intervention meant survival. The psychological weight of life at sea was enormous, but these sailors both. Leaders and crew found ways to carry it through structure, ritual, mutual care, and a shared belief in purpose. They faced not just the ocean, but the crushing vastness of time and distance with their spirits intact. The effects of sea life stretched far beyond the journey itself. Sailors who returned after years at sea were often changed in ways their families couldn't fully understand. They viewed risk, uncertainty, and even mortality with a different lens. For many, the everyday concerns of land life felt strangely small after the life-or-death struggles of the ocean. This created a quiet sense of disconnection, a psychological distance that lingered even when they were physically home. Many gathered in taverns to swap tales with others who had known the sea. These weren't just storytelling sessions. They were acts of healing. Informal gatherings where mariners could speak freely and feel understood in a way few others could offer. Shared hardship forged a kind of solidarity that transcended ordinary conversation. Families of sailors endured their own emotional toll. Wives watched their husbands vanish over the horizon, never knowing if they'd return. Children often grew up knowing their fathers only in fragments, brief visits between voyages. The ever-present uncertainty, the inability to plan for the future, the constant fear of loss all contributed to a background stress that shaped entire coastal communities. And yet, somehow medieval sailors endured. More than that, they adapted. They developed emotional resilience that seems astonishing by today's standards. They found ways to create purpose in a world full of danger and hardship. They built systems of mutual support that helped them. Weather conditions most modern people could barely imagine. Some of this strength came from the extremity of their lives. When survival is in question, many worries that burden more comfortable lives fall away. There's clarity in hardship, a ruthless prioritization, that, paradoxically, can lead to a sense of freedom. But more importantly, these sailors understood something we may have lost, that meaning isn't found in ease or comfort, but in the ability to face suffering and still find purpose. They knew that courage wasn't about being fearless, but about choosing to act despite fear. And they understood that the deepest bonds between people are forged not in peace, but in struggle. The sea became a kind of teacher, one that offered no mercy, but infinite wisdom. It peeled away illusion and forced sailors to confront life's rawest truths: the certainty of death, the weight of choice, and the necessity of courage. Those who survived became people of depth, forged in salt and storm. The psychological insights of these sailors endure today. Their methods of maintaining morale under stress, their understanding of team dynamics in crisis, their models of leadership remain profoundly relevant. They prove that, with the right mindset and support, the human spirit could withstand almost anything. They showed that meaning can exist even in suffering, and that unity in the face of adversity can transcend class, culture, and origin. Today's world, built around safety and convenience, often forgets these lessons. We've replaced hard-won wisdom with the illusion of control, but the ocean never forgets. And the courage of those medieval sailors continues to echo, inspiring anyone brave enough to step beyond what's familiar. Their greatest strength, in the end, wasn't muscle or mastery of sails, was the mind, both their deepest vulnerability and their most powerful tool. And perhaps nothing demonstrates that more clearly than the way they navigated the seas without modern tools. Long before GPS or radar, medieval sailors developed methods that today feel almost miraculous. They read the ocean like a sacred text, each wave, each wind, each cloud a signal to be interpreted. Through an art known as dead reckoning, they estimated position by tracking their speed, heading, and time since their last known location. They used a tool called a logline, or rope, with evenly spaced knots thrown into the sea to measure how fast their ship was moving. The number of knots that passed through their hands over a set period became the measure of speed we still call knots today, but this was only the beginning. Skilled navigators could read the color of the water to tell if land was near. Dark blue meant deep ocean. Lighter shades signaled shallower coastal waters. Murky water often indicated nearby river mouths or estuaries. Waves also told stories. Swells formed by distant storms traveled thousands of miles with consistent patterns. Sailors could use them to maintain direction even when skies were clouded. More subtle still, they learned to recognize faint changes in wave reflection caused by hidden landmass, an invisible clue of shores still out of sight. Nature became their compass. Seabirds that rarely flew far from land offered hints of coastlines. Their flight at dawn and dusk revealed direction. The presence of certain fish, floating plants, or even a change in sea temperature signaled proximity to shallows, currents, or land. Celestial navigation was also vital. Though simpler than later techniques, medieval mariners used the North Star to find latitude. They'd keep constellations aligned with sails or ropes to steer at night. The astrolabe, borrowed from ancient Greek and Islamic innovations, allowed skilled hands to measure star height for latitude. Eventually, the magnetic compass arrived from China, providing a steady sense of direction even when stars were hidden. But even with tools, navigation demanded something more: intuition, a deep, almost mystical sense of the sea. The greatest navigators could feel their way across oceans using knowledge passed from elder to apprentice through story and song, demonstration, and trust. This information was guarded, passed from master to novice, and formed the heart of a seafaring tradition. Navigation wasn't just a science, it was a sacred trust, and in many cases, a matter of life or death. Their spiritual beliefs were woven into these practices. Success on the seas was seen not only as a result of skill, but as a sign of divine favor. Sailors carried charms, performed blessings before departure, and observed customs meant to ensure safe passage. Weather prediction became an essential craft. Experienced mariners could sense coming storms days in advance. They read the Clouds felt the shift in air pressure and watched how birds and sea creatures behaved. A ring around the sun or moon warned of trouble. A red dawn often meant storms ahead. The natural world spoke constantly. They simply learned how to listen, and they did so together. Navigation wasn't the captain's job alone. Every man aboard, from helmsman to lookout, played a role. Their combined observations created a living, breathing map. Collaboration ensured safety, and in that teamwork bonds grew. Port cities became knowledge hubs. Sailors traded tips, shared dangers to avoid, and mapped currents from distant voyages. These informal exchanges spread navigation techniques across continents, creating a global web of oceanic understanding. Superior navigation changed the world. Merchants who could find reliable routes gained enormous economic power. Quicker journeys meant fewer losses, greater trade opportunities, and vast wealth. In this way, the most gifted sailors became more than explorers. They became the architects of an interconnected world. Valuable knowledge was the sailors' currency, and their navigational mastery often elevated them beyond mere laborers. Some earned not wages, but shares in the voyage's profits, becoming partners in ventures that spanned continents. But navigation was never solely about reaching a destination. It symbolized something greater: humanity's relentless urge to explore, to connect, to go beyond the edge of the known world. Those who mastered the art of the sea weren't just mariners. They were architects of a global vision. They helped shrink the map, linking distant lands and unfamiliar cultures. Their skills weren't just practical. They were transformative, turning fragmented kingdoms into interconnected civilizations. Their courage, intelligence, and adaptability echo through time, reminding us that progress is born not in safety, but in boldness. These men didn't simply cross oceans. They bridged the chasm between isolation and connection, laying the foundations for a global society. Their legacy reaches far beyond shipwrecks and trade logs. It's written in every port city, every shared innovation, every moment when the world seemed just a little more connected than before. And yet, for all their skill, these mariners still faced the cruel hand of commerciforce, just as unpredictable as the waves. Part 8. The Merchant's Gamble, even the most hardened. Sailors knew there was one force more merciless than the sea: the medieval economy. These voyages were not leisurely adventures. They were WWII ventures with stakes measured in fortunes, futures, and generations of family legacy. To fund a single expedition required staggering investment. A ship was an economic miracle constructed from rare woods forged with iron, rigged with costly canvas, and crewed by men who demanded months of wages up front. Then came the cargo: precious goods like English wool, French wine, or Flemish clothall, loaded onto a vessel that could vanish without a trace the moment it left the harbor. A Venetian merchant might stand on the dock and watch his life's fortune drift toward the horizon, praying it wouldn't end up on the ocean floor or in pirate hands. The pressure was crushing. Many merchants mortgaged everything they owned: homes, shops, even their freedom to fund a single voyage. If it failed, ruin wasn't just financial. It could mean prison, slavery, or disgrace. And failure was common. Ships disappeared, routinely claimed by storms, pirates, or shifting political tides. A sudden conflict could turn a friendly port hostile, turning goods into contraband and crews into prisoners. The sea was dangerous. So was timing. Consider Marco Benedetto, a Genoese trader whose ship set sail for the Black Sea in 1347, just as the Black Death swept westward. By the time his ship arrived, half the crew was dead. The ports were under quarantine, and commerce had collapsed. He faced a cruel choice: sell at a loss to desperate buyers, or return with worthless goods and an even smaller crew. Either way, his family's fortune was gone, but pirates were often worse. These weren't lawless rogues. They were often state-sanctioned raiders. A Venetian ship caught in Genoese waters might be seized under flimsy pretense. There was no international maritime law, no protection, no justice. A merchant's best defense was strategy. To limit losses, traders split cargo across multiple ships. Some traveled in convoys, Others used decoys, sacrificing one ship to save another. Many paid tributes to pirate lords for protection, a polite form of extortion, and every bit of it chipped away at their profit margins. Financing these expeditions often involved complex partnerships. One partner would invest capital, another the labor and expertise. This arrangement, known as a commenda, spread the risk but also the reward. If a voyage succeeded, it might return 4 times the investment, but losses were just as common. Total collapse was always just one storm away. To hedge against catastrophe, wealthy patrons, nobles, monasteries, even entire cities diversified investments across multiple ventures. This early form of portfolio management helped mitigate individual risk, but couldn't protect against broader disasters like war or plague. The stress was relentless. Merchants could wait years for news of a ship's fate. In that time, they might live in anxious limbo, praying for good weather and peaceful ports. Some responded with piety, giving generously to churches and commissioning altars in hopes of divine favor. Others grew cynical, trusting no one, steeling themselves against inevitable loss. Many became superstitious, carrying charms, observing omens, and refusing to sail on certain days. Their wives, meanwhile, held households together, running businesses, raising children, and preparing for the possibility they'd never see their husbands again. And yet, they kept sailing. Why? Because for those outside the nobility, trade was the only way to amass serious wealth. The rewards were astronomical. Single successful voyage could elevate a modest merchant into the ruling elite. Exotic spices, fine silks, rare gems, these goods could return 10 or 20 times the initial investment. Bought influence, secured marriages, and created dynasties. The most successful merchant mariners weren't just lucky, they were brilliant. They combined shrewd business instincts with deep seafaring knowledge. They understood trade winds and profit margins, ship design and diplomacy. They were captains, diplomats, financiers, and negotiators all at once. Their strength wasn't just individual, it was relational. They cultivated vast networks, maintained letters with agents across continents, and built reputations that opened locked doors. But they never forgot how precarious it all was. One wrong decision, one act of betrayal, one unseen storm, and everything could vanish. This tension created a unique mindset, cautious but daring, strategic yet instinctive. They had to be. Because failure didn't come with second chances, some merchants became deeply religious, placing their fate in the hands of saints. Others turned inward, developing complex rituals or mental routines to cope. Many turned bitter, hardened by loss. But they all knew this. They were part of something larger, with each risk, each voyage, each trade. They were laying the groundwork for a world that had never existed before, a world connected not just by wealth, but by knowledge, culture, and ideas. Their bravery wasn't showy. It was the quiet courage of men who risked everything, not for glory, but for survival, for legacy, for family. They built the arteries of global commerce, paved the way for the Renaissance, and seeded the roots of our modern economy. Every time you buy something made half a world away, every time you trace the threads of a global supply chain. Standing in the shadow of their gamble, the medieval seas were realms of death, yes. But they were also crucibles of innovation, courage, and transformation. At the heart of it all were men who stared into the unknown and sailed forward. Anyway, as dawn broke over storm-tossed waters, the medieval sailor awoke not just to wind and wave, but to a deeper truth. The battle to survive was never only against the sea. It was a test of the entire self. The ocean pushed their bodies to the brink, challenged their minds with isolation and fear, and probed the depths of their spirit, searching for that unbreakable core that would decide whether they lived or died. These sailors knew early that the sea was as much a psychological adversary as a physical one. Out there on endless waters where days blurred and the horizon offered no comfort, mind could be either the greatest ally or the surest threat. Those who endured the longest had learned to forge an internal compass that stayed true even when stars vanished behind clouds and wooden instruments failed. That resilience wasn't just born of hardship, it was shaped through daily rituals. Morning prayers didn't just ask for protection, they offered clarity, a sense of purpose. Evening songs were more than distraction, they affirmed their humanity amid the inhuman surroundings. Shared stories during long watches weren't idle chatter. They were anchors, binding men together in purpose and memory, giving shape to lives adrift in an unpredictable world. Yet they also knew survival meant balancing hope with realism. The ocean punished arrogance. Sailors practiced what might be called practical pessimism, always ready for the worst, even while striving for the best. They checked ropes twice, stored supplies thrice, trusted no calm sea to last more than a moment. This mindset shaped how they viewed leadership. Voyage didn't depend on one man's strength, but on many working as one. The good captain listened. The wise navigator shared. The just cook rationed with fairness. The humble sailor gave without complaint. When one link weakened, the chain that bound them all could shatter. Trust was everything. When a sailor promised to keep watch, to maintain gear, or to warn of danger, that vow was sacred. Lives hung on it. This code of mutual reliance often formed bonds stronger than family, forged in a crucible of salt storm and sacrifice. Adaptability, too, was essential. The sea never repeated its lessons. A shift in cloud color, the silence before a gust, the movement of birdsall could signal what came next. Sailors learned to bend, not break. Flexibility was strength, not weakness. Their faith evolved as, well, yes, they prayed, but not with the expectation of safety. Instead, they sought meaning, purpose that could outlast despair. Their prayers became more than requests. They were gratitude for survival, reflections on their place in a vast creation, and quiet dialogues with fate itself. Even in hardship, they found wonder. The arc of dolphins under the bow, the ghostly glow of night plankton, the sky at sunset, stained with colors too wild for names. These were more than distractions, they were sustenance, proof that even in trial beauty endured. With time, these sailors became more than men. They were living libraries, carriers of wisdom beyond navigation or weather. They became storytellers, counselors, and teachers. Their presence gave hope, a sign that even the edge of the world could be crossed and returned from. Their legacy is more than nautically human. They proved survival isn't only about food and strength. It's about endurance, cooperation, and spirit. They showed that progress comes not from conquest, but adaptation, not from domination, but respect, not from solitary acts, but shared commitment. Their true achievement wasn't simply staying alive. It was holding on to hope in places where hope had no reason to exist. Their journeys remind us that the human heart can withstand the fiercest storms. It's not by overcoming the world, but by learning to move with it. As the last light fades across the medieval seas, we reflect on what these men truly accomplished. In storm and silence, they became more than sailors. They became proof that humanity can adapt, grow, and rise again. And when surrounded by forces beyond understanding, when they read the sea like scripture, when they felt a storm in their bones, when they whispered to the wind and found their place by instinct alone, they weren't indulging superstition, they were practicing a form of wisdom modern minds are only beginning to respect. A wisdom earned, not taught. Their lives were not easy. Malnutrition, exhaustion, illness, and disappearance were constant threats. But they endured not because they were stronger than the sea, but because they accepted its challenge. Doing so, they revealed a deeper human truth, that meaning is found not in the absence of struggle, but in how we respond to it. They didn't just build ships or follow stars. They shaped the future, their ability to work with nature, not against it. Their ability to adapt, improvise, and persevere remains one of the most powerful examples of what people can do when faced with impossible odds. We can still learn from them. Their stories show us how to prepare without panic, to value tradition without stagnation, to lead with empathy and survive with solidarity. In a world increasingly removed from nature's challenges, Their example brings us back to the core of what it means to be human. These sailors transformed not only their ships, but themselves. Their tools were rope and wood, but their true power was resilience, wisdom, and community. They didn't merely survive the deadly seas, they were reborn by them, made stronger, wiser, and deeply, unforgettably human. Their legacy isn't just in charts or routes, it's in the reminder that, with courage, skill, and fellowship, even the most impossible journey can be made.